Have you ever felt that sting of injustice? That moment when you're judged unfairly, simply by how you look or what people assume about you. It cuts deep, doesn't it? It makes you question everything. Well, get ready, because the story I'm about to share with you is exactly about that feeling, amplified in a way you might not expect. This is for all of you out there who've ever been underestimated. And before we begin this emotional roller coaster, take a second to hit that like button. It tells me you're ready for this. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far our stories can reach. Now, let's talk about Eleanor. Eleanor wasn't wearing fancy clothes or dripping in expensive jewelry that day at the airport. She looked like any other traveler, maybe a little tired from an early morning. But little did the gate agent at the first-class boarding line know, Eleanor's life was anything but ordinary. Let's dive to see what happened next, shall we? Eleanor approached the gate, her boarding pass in hand. It clearly stated first class. But as she reached the counter, the agent, a young man named Chad, barely glanced at her ticket. He looked her up and down, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. First class is for priority passengers only, he said, his tone condescending. Perhaps there's been a mistake? Eleanor, a kind and gentle soul, simply smiled. No mistake, sir. This is my ticket. She held it out for him to see properly. Chad finally took the boarding pass, his eyes widening slightly as he registered the name and the class. But instead of apologizing, a flicker of suspicion crossed his face. Ma'am, he said, his voice still laced with doubt, this ticket seems unusual. May I see some identification? Eleanor patiently produced her driver's license. Chad scrutinized it, comparing the picture to the woman standing before him. He hesitated for a moment, then said, I'm afraid I need to make a quick call to verify this. Eleanor's heart sank a little. She'd faced this kind of subtle prejudice before. People often made assumptions based on her unassuming appearance. It always stung, but she usually let it slide. Today, though, she was tired and just wanted to get on the plane. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Other first-class passengers, dressed in sharp suits and designer outfits, boarded without a second glance. Eleanor stood there, feeling increasingly humiliated. Finally, Chad hung up the phone, his expression still guarded. Ma'am, he said, his voice stiff, we've been unable to verify your ticket. I'm afraid you won't be able to board in first class. A wave of disbelief washed over Eleanor. But my ticket is valid, she protested, her voice trembling slightly. I booked it myself. I'm sorry, ma'am, Chad said, his tone cold and final. There's nothing I can do. You'll have to speak to customer service. He gestured towards a distant counter with a dismissive wave of his hand. Eleanor felt tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't just about the first-class seat. It was about the disrespect, the blatant assumption that she didn't belong. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from her husband, Alistair. Everything okay, love? You should be boarding by now. Eleanor quickly typed back a message explaining the situation, her fingers shaking with frustration. She didn't expect him to do anything. Alistair was a private man who rarely interfered in her day-to-day life. He always encouraged her to handle things herself. But this time was different. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a blatant act of prejudice. A few minutes later, Eleanor's phone rang. It was Alistair. His voice, usually calm and reassuring, had an edge to it that she rarely heard. Tell me exactly what happened, Eleanor, he said, his tone firm but filled with concern. Eleanor recounted the entire ordeal, her voice thick with emotion. She could hear Alistair's sharp intake of breath at the other end of the line. Give me the agent's name, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Eleanor hesitated. She didn't want to cause trouble for anyone, but the injustice she had faced was still raw. His name is Chad, she said softly. And what airline is this? Alistair asked. Eleanor told him. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Alistair said, Stay right there, Eleanor. I'll handle this. Eleanor wasn't sure what Alistair meant by handle this, but she knew better than to question him when his voice had that tone. She stood there, feeling a mix of apprehension and a sliver of hope, just as she was starting to wonder if Alistair could actually do anything. A commotion erupted at the gate. A well-dressed man, who looked like he was in charge, rushed towards Chad, his face pale with panic. "Chad, what's going on here?" the man exclaimed, his voice urgent. Chad looked confused. "Sir, I was just following protocol. This woman's first-class ticket couldn't be verified." The man's eyes darted towards Eleanor, who was standing a short distance away. He rushed over to her, his face etched with apology. "Madam," he said, his voice full of remorse, "I am so incredibly sorry for the way you've been treated. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Eleanor looked at him, bewildered. "Misunderstanding?" "Yes, ma'am," the man continued. "My name is Mr. Abernathy, and I'm the station manager. I just received a call, a very important call. It seems there was a grave error in how you were handled." Just then, Alistair called Eleanor again. "Eleanor, are you still there?" Eleanor held the phone to her ear. "Yes, Alistair. This gentleman, Mr. Abernathy, just came over. He's apologizing. Tell Mr. Abernathy that I expect a personal apology from the gate agent as well," Alistair said, his voice still firm. "And make sure he understands that the kind of behavior his staff displayed is completely unacceptable." Mr. Abernathy, who had been listening intently, nodded vigorously. "Absolutely, sir. I assure you this will be dealt with immediately." He turned to Chad, his expression thunderous. "Chad, you are to apologize to this lady right now." Chad, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing horror, finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. He stammered an apology, his face flushed with embarrassment. Mr. Abernathy then personally escorted Eleanor onto the plane, ensuring she was comfortably settled in her first-class seat. He apologized profusely again, explaining that there had been a mix-up and that her ticket was indeed valid. As Eleanor sat in her plush seat, sipping a glass of water, she couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Alistair's quiet power had spoken volumes. Later, after she had settled into her hotel at her destination, Alistair called again. "How are you doing, love?" he asked, his voice gentle once more. "I'm fine, Alistair," Eleanor said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did, Eleanor," Alistair replied. "No one deserves to be treated like that, especially not you." The next day, Eleanor received an email from the airline. It was a formal apology not just to her, but to all passengers who might have witnessed the incident. The email also stated that the airline had launched an internal investigation and that the staff members involved had been suspended pending the outcome. A few days later, Eleanor saw a news report online. It detailed how several employees at the airline had been fired due to discriminatory behavior towards a passenger. While Eleanor's name wasn't mentioned, she knew it was about her. The experience left a lasting impression on Eleanor. It reminded her that even in a world where appearances often mattered, true worth lay within. And it also showed her the depth of her husband's love and his unwavering support, even in situations that seem small on the surface. It's easy to judge a book by its cover, isn't it? We often make quick assumptions about people based on how they look or what they wear. But this story reminds us that appearances can be deceiving and that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their background or perceived status. What do you think about this story? Have you ever experienced something similar? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, kindness and respect cost nothing, but they can mean the world to someone.